So I want to thank everybody for joining today. Super excited to share the design I've been working on. We'll break down the process. We'll look at the digital rendering as well. I know a lot of you are new to the Professional Permaculture Designer group. And so what that group is about is sharing business skills and also design skills in terms of many scales of permaculture design. I've been focusing on residential, but I'm moving into farm scale. I just started managing a 160-acre farm in southwestern Wisconsin, which I'm very excited about in the US here. Dan Halsey and I are both based in the Twin Cities. Dan works around the world. I'll talk a little bit more about him as well. So aside from that farm managing and managing this group here in Facebook, I also have my own design business. It's called Artisan Environments, and I bill myself as an edible and native landscape designer here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And I've been doing that for a couple years now, just moved into it full time, which I'm really excited about. Things are really starting to happen with that. And I also offer mentoring in design sales and monetizing a permaculture design business to be able to do the work we want to do, make a good living, and thus that feeds our ability to keep going out and doing it. So today we've got a special guest. You guys are aware, Dan Halsey of Southwoods Ecosystem and Ecology Design. Dan is a partner designer of United Designers, which is an international permaculture design cooperative that I've just become involved with recently. And I'll actually be doing a training with Dan that you all are also invited to, which is in Chicago in late February. It's the 25th to March 1st in Chicago, Illinois. And he'll also be offering the same course in Madrid, Spain in May via United Designers España, which is also Diseñadores Unidos de España, on May 3rd through the 5th. He's also appearing at the Earth Repair Conference in Port Townsend, Washington, which I didn't know. So is that with Mark Lakeman, Dan?
Yeah, that's just working, or I'm presenting there about, basically ecological design work that I do, and then also getting involved with a lot of the conversations. Hopefully, looking forward to some good, what I'm calling right now, the heavy conversations that we're having with all of our environmental situations going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark was an acquaintance of mine in Portland, Oregon when I was doing edible landscaping there. And I really enjoy the work that City Repair and then Earth Repair, I believe they're related, are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to review the current design that I've been working on, which is I've been calling it 1.5 acres. It's 1.36 acres, which is 0.62 hectares. It's a suburban yard in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. So it's within the city, but it's actually really close to the Mississippi River, our main bisecting river that goes down the whole length of North America. If you're international, you probably are aware of it. And it's a really interesting situation. It's somebody I've known for quite a while, and they recently retired. They wanted to turn this whole landscape, which is right now covered with black walnuts, they wanted to turn it into a big native garden and also produce a lot of their own food. So what we're going to go over today is going to involve a general background of the project, the what, where, why, how, and the intention behind this design package that I offered to the client, excuse me, and the stage that the design is currently in. And Dan and I are going to go through what's working and what could be improved about the design in its presentation. I consider Dan a mentor in terms of permaculture design and business, and especially the international collaboration that he has created over the past years is really inspiring. So without any more description, I can get started here, and I'll share my screen with you guys, and we can get going on looking at the design here.
Sure.
So Dan, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I've got the general site image and soils up here. I'm actually within Adobe Illustrator right now, which is what United Designers uses. It's Dan and I will go later into exactly what United Designers is, and I'm sure a lot of that will come up as we go along. But what we're looking at here is, of course, the aerial view, and this is I actually took from Google Maps, Google Earth, and in general, the best way to do this, the most accurate, is using a drone, which is something Dan does a lot, something I actually want to start using as well. But right to start off here, I will remove the soils piece. So I'm going to go open, you can see how the layers are working in here a little bit, which we can talk more about. So this site is basically just on the fringes of the big capital city of Minnesota. And what this is actually is an old farm that was subdivided and further subdivided. And so eventually we ended up with these smaller plots. So this is 1.5 acres. And you can see these long shadows. Those are the tree trunks. This image was probably taken in the morning. North is up. And actually this design is in process, though the north arrow is not actually on here, but north is up. And the whole backyard is covered with these black walnut trees. And if you're familiar with Juglans nigra, it's our native black walnut in the Midwest and the East Coast. And it produces a toxin that can affect the growth of certain plants, especially non-native plants like your traditional horticultural varieties. So the client here, and if you can see my mouse, I'm moving over this area, they removed a lot of trees in the front yard on this left side, that southwest side of the yard. They removed probably 4 mature black walnuts that were over 1 foot in diameter, and then created a vegetable garden there. And we'll take a look at the actual plan below it too. These are just all in layers. And so what their goal is to just create as much food production as possible within a manageable amount of space, and also to start to work with more perennial foods and create a forageable landscape in this urban area. So it's also an exhibition site for their neighborhood, for people around them. And that's something that I've brought in as part of my design work, is helping people connect with their community, to find other people who are interested in learning and helping out on the property, helping to install things, get things going. So I think what we'll start with here is, I'll just turn on the soils again. So we'll start with these kind of top layers. And I also want to mention that the file that I'm using right now, and this title block, that block with all the text you see on the right side of this plan, are files from United Designers, which is the group that Dan, I believe, co-founded. And it works in such a way where we have these files available to us as part of the design cooperative. And then we're able to update them as we refine things, etc. But all these layers, for the most part, are from that file that I got from United Designers. So I'm working within their design framework to a certain extent, but I was actually halfway done with the concept of this plan before I brought it in. So you're seeing kind of a hybrid design approach. And my background has been in a lot of more traditional landscaping. I did a lot of edible and native landscaping that I worked into working with clients who are more geared toward you could call conventional landscaping. But so I've been used to just going as fast as I can with design, and not doing a bad job, but not doing as much documentation. And what United Designers is about is doing more of this documentation, so that we can bring other people on midway through the design process, be able to share with other people internationally, and know what we're all talking about. So that's just a quick overview of that.
That's a big part of it. We're trying to, like I always talk about, we're trying to create a process and refine a process that is repeatable and predictable, and that covers all the bases as we're doing the design work. And that's what it's been very successful at doing that. And we're tweaking it and we add things. But even this, having a file, an Illustrator that already has all the layers named for you, it just helps you just go that much faster. Because if I'm going through the base map and I open up the base map layer, all those layers or the groups are already in there. And so, okay, put my topography here. It just is my grocery list of things to work on. And then even on the United Designers library of the resources there's even the folder that you use for your job folder. And within that job folder are all the folders for the information that you use to do the design. So that's kind of our standard procedure, is to create the process, the documentation, and then the templates, so that it supports you in your work and it helps support the process. So you can just keep it. We're not, I'm not a linear thinker. I like to work in parallel on a lot of different things. But on the other hand, process needs to be one after the other, almost chronological, so that you can remember what's needed first to build on the design as you go.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been really helpful working this process into the way that I do things, because there's so much less kind of floating around in my head about, oh, did I do this? Did I not? It's just gives you a record for yourself, but then also does make it that much more interchangeable with people of allied disciplines or other experts you might bring in as you go along. And the visual aspect of this is really amazing too. For example, I turn on this layer, I've got a whole new set of information. And for this site in particular, it's quite simple. This is a small enough site and in a particular place where there was a lot of glacial outwash, other things happening that deposited this one type of soil in this area, this Malarty complex, which is very well drained to 5 feet or more below the soil surface. So there's no ponding on this site, and there aren't any steep slopes whatsoever. It's just like a very gradual tilt toward the south, toward the river there. And you can feel free to jump in whenever you want to, Dan. So
sure. Yeah, this is now, of course, your soil map is very straightforward and simple. Whereas many times you'll have a soil map that does look like a quilt. It's a patchwork of all sorts of different things. And that's based on scale. When you have if you have a 1/4 acre, most likely you're going to have 1, maybe 2 or 3. When you're doing 10 or 15 or 80 acres, you might have dozens of different soil types. And that's where it becomes more important. But that also is nice because we have that available to us. That graphics, the artwork, all that information is available to us from the USDA. And it makes for a great graphic element within our design that we screen back. Again, we're following the pattern of the land, and the soils are going to be that huge pattern that's going to dictate what we do. So, of course, it needs to be represented in the design.
Yeah, and also as far as urban areas or within towns especially, it can be a little hard to find that USDA data. So the county level or that more local regional level can also be a place to find that information as well. In the US, most larger towns have some type of county data, or I should say counties have that.
And that doesn't replace good soil testing. That's
yes.
a generalized way to get started, understand what the soil types are, and then do your soil testing as you need to.
Exactly. Thanks. So this is a general concept map. And one thing that's interesting about this project is that I've done some of the concept maps after the fact, just to be able to illustrate to you guys what's going on, and also to get myself used to just documenting absolutely everything. So we have a record of it. We can also show the client the decision-making process, things like that. So what you're looking at here is these white boxes are the structures. And this is down on the bottom on the south, you enter the property. And what ended up happening is that these people have actually lived here for about 30 years. And so they had a pretty well identified way of using the property already. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking that knowledge, that context, and then plugging that in with what they're looking to do in the future. And you can see the red there is actually what I determined to be the zone 1 of their property. The places that they're going to be visiting the most, the areas that they already visit a lot every day when they're out gardening and things. And in the winter time in Minnesota, it's very, very cold and they're not doing too much outside. But this is more of a view of during the growing season, the types of things that they're doing, the higher frequency activities, places they need to be keeping an eye on daily. You can see there's some plant nurseries, top and bottom, and vegetable gardens. We'll get more into that stuff. So that's that zone of high intensity. I personally tend to work and every site's different, but I don't necessarily do like a concentric shape of zone 1, zone 2, et cetera, for these 5 permaculture zones. And of course, most sites don't necessarily even have a zone 5 because that's considered wilderness. But what I'm working with is the level of intensity and where the people are every day, and thus where the systems that need the most attention should be located. Mm-hmm. So that's your annual vegetables, fruits, and nursery plants that require watching in terms of irrigation, supplemental fertility, things like that. Their compost materials storage area. places that they're going to be using frequently. And then you can see in the middle here is what I'm calling zone 2 to 3, which is we're working with a lot of perennial vegetables. This is within that black walnut canopy now. So these are mature trees above. They do provide a filtered shade, so it's not totally dark down there. But we've got some sunlight in this pocket. So working with perennial vegetables and squashes, and also bringing in some other plants we'll talk about a little later, because I identified a warmer microclimate back there where there's kind of a sun catch in terms of temperature. And then far in the back, you can see there's a native food and habitat area. And part of this is to minimize the amount of maintenance that needs to happen. Of course, with any native landscape, it's not a given that it's going to be low maintenance, depending on what you plant, how it's implemented, what's already existing there in terms of what quote unquote invasive plants, aggressive things. There are obviously multiple factors that go into that, but one thing that I've found to be really, really exciting for my clients is the idea of creating a forageable landscape. And I was talking with Matt Labone of Custom Foodscaping in St. Louis about this. We're just really amped up about this idea of these forageable human and wildlife habitats using primarily native foods. And I know that Dan, also you're interested in this idea of botanical preserves, which kind of meshes with that in various ways in terms of edible and medicinal plants, but also just, plants that are creating habitat or building soil and are able to naturalize in a way that's beneficial on multiple levels.
Yeah, the botanical preserve, which was started with the project I'm working on in northern Minnesota, has now expanded to pretty much a standard procedure now and a term for most of the design work. There needs to be some kind of, we used to call it Zone 5, where we left it alone, but right now it's basically we're back to restoring the ecology so much in every area that we're working. So every site has to have some kind of area where we're enhancing the diversity. We're bringing in plants that might be under stress, might be threatened. The ICUN red list of plants that are threatened is now thousands and thousands of plants that are disappearing. And in Minnesota, we have our own list of about 300 plants that are just disappearing off the landscape.
Wow.
And so that's important to me. It's like we need to start if we're going to do this kind of work, let's remember there are a lot of other plants that we can instill in that. I mean, along with ramps or ground nuts or whatever we're going to do for foraging, is also put in a lot of these other plants that have probably very important ecological services to the ecology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you may have touched on this, Dan, but the habitat fragmentation piece is huge. So looking at even these smaller scale sites, and this as far as a suburban or urban lot is actually pretty large at 1.5 acres. I'm commonly working on 1/10 of an acre, like a 50 by 100 foot lot, or around that size in urban settings. Mm-hmm. But as far as we're looking at here, in terms of the greater neighborhood, this is part of my interest in working with people who have a passion for sharing this knowledge and sharing the benefits of this type of landscape with their neighbors. Because when we're working on that kind of social permaculture community building aspect, we're not only building plant communities, but this site, for example, you'll see is going to provide a surplus that these people aren't able to manage on their own necessarily at certain times of year in terms of harvesting, or just they're going to have an ability to give things away and connect with other people that way. And as we get more people interested in a certain location, we can then start thinking about maybe some habitat corridors, or also people growing certain foods that work well in their yard versus someone else's, and be able to have that type of exchange of wildlife, exchange of foods, surplus, things like that.
Yeah, our plant lists and we might get into the plant database a little bit, is we can expand a lot. And especially when you have the land, you can expand into the more passive foraging type crops, things that are interesting, but at least, start bringing in the pollinators and a lot more of the native perennials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's part of this design as well, is bringing in some more insectary plantings, I'm calling them. And it looks like some of my labels disappeared, but that's all right. Bringing in more insectary plantings, which is just a kind of fancy, fun way of saying like a wildflower meadow with some grasses type of thing, which can actually be potentially easier to manage than say some larger shrub plantings or other perennials that aren't able to, say, be mowed over once a year at certain times of year to manage them.
Mm-hmm.
So jumping right in here, that's interesting. I must have my
Put it on a different layer.
yeah, these labels here were on the wrong layer, so I'll just put them there, and we'll see if that works.
You'll see.
Yep.
So here's a couple little notations as we look at this too. Is so right now this is one file, which is the design on the title block, and when I'm doing my design, and some of them are a lot larger, some of them about the same size. You'll see up in that list of the layers, there's notes. And so all the text work on anything that I'm working on goes into that notes layer. And if it's text, it goes in there. Now, some of the symbols for plant symbols, they have the text in there for their designation. So that's not something you just drag into notes. So that any writing at all is always in that notes layer, because a lot of times I just want to turn it off. I don't want to see that, especially when I'm working.
Yeah.
But I have two files when I work. One is the artwork file, and that's where I do my design work. And I work at 20 scale. Doesn't matter what size the property is. I always work at 20 scale because all my plants are at 20 scale. And all my symbols are at 20 scale. So that's why I do that. And then I place that artwork into the title block here, like
and blow it up.
And then I resize it, and then I to a scale, my final scale. So
that's really great to hear, and so you guys know, this is my first plan working within this framework, and I'm doing the training with Dan in late February. So I've actually been doubling the size of all my symbols.
Yeah, right.
It's worked, but that makes it a lot easier.
I mean, that's what we were doing. Is like, this is a few years ago when I was working with Kellen, who was a landscape architecture intern, and then we worked together for a couple of years. But every job we're having to rescale all these symbols. It's like, this doesn't make any sense, right? It's like, we've already got them scaled. So I said, okay, everything to 20 scale. The artwork is always 20 scale, and then we'll import that or place that into our title block and scale it to fit, and then find what our final scale is, and then all that is text, and put that on the title block. Then we're done, right? Then we don't have to deal with it ever again, because as you can imagine, every one of these plants, every one of those symbols, resizing them again makes them unusable for the next time, that you're doing a project. And even you'll see on some of my symbol lists, I have a very good SUV that I'm very proud of. It's our symbol for all cars and SUVs, right? And it's at 20 scale. And
I saw that. Do you mind if I click over to that file?
No, it's fine.
So I think it's in here.
Yeah, it should be. There it is.
I was like, what's that doing there?
Yeah, so that's a 20 scale SUV, and there are other things too. And now that it's not in this file yet, even the roof lines and the sheds and the chicken coops, all these things that I'm doing in 20 scale, I'm now dragging them into my symbol library. It's like, why reinvent these things? Why do another roof line?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of big in the roof lines. I like having my building, look 3D. So that's and so when I do these pretty straightforward roof lines, I'm just going to drag that now into my symbol library, and I can always take it apart. But since I did a really good job on like the gable roof or things like that, and I have a number of these, I'm just going to cannibalize these symbols and make the next one.
Yeah.
And it's all to scale, so it makes it that much simpler. But
yeah, it's really changed the way that I'm working. And I've worked in other CAD programs such as Vectorworks, where I did create a symbol library. But there's something I really love about Illustrator. It's so, I mean, it's in the name. It's so visual in terms of the artistic aspect of it. It's not just a tool to draw these two-dimensional plans. It's really creating a piece of art, which really, for me, brings a lot of joy to the process.
You could put your personal style any direction you want to go. And that's one of the issues I have with Pro Landscape or any of the CAD type landscape software. They give you choices of how it's going to look. They can even make it look like it was done in pencil.
Yeah.
But that's very limiting. And most of the time, the plants they have in their plant list aren't our plants. You know, we have a lot of obscure plant species that we use. Well, now, you know, with the 2,300 symbols, 2,300 plants we have in the plant database, and then only about 300, 350 in the Illustrator, most of those plants are the ones that we as ecological designers use. Most other people don't.
Yeah.
We can have that all ready to go.
And there will be a number of new symbols showing up after I'm done with my design here. I've already created a bunch.
Well, that's the other thing too, is that because we're working in a common scale and we're working together, as we save these and we save them as teams, our symbol library just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The plants that you're using that I may not have in there yet, our standard labels for our symbols are, you know, scientific name, common name. And now they will order, you know, if you save them into the main list and you alphabetize it, now all the new plants are now in alphabetical order by scientific name, which makes it so much easier to find these plants as you're scrolling through. And then you're just dragging them onto your design. They go into your symbol library for that design, and then you can go to work. But every time you do a job, you're now increasing your assets for the symbols and the artwork.
Yep.
And now that we're all doing that, now it's like, now we have multiple people making more symbols, more, you know, more ways of doing things and representing the work.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful thing because it's helping. I can already see how this is transforming the amount of design I'm able to do. And obviously you can see the level of legibility that this has for a client to be able to see this versus just a pencil design. Of course, Dan and I both we start out with hand-drawn concepts and then move it into digital, because if you're starting out with a digital design, you handicap yourself in terms of the amount of creativity you can apply to it because of these tools. You know, just drawing a line, that's not going to draw for me.
Right.
Just drawing a line with the pen tool isn't the same as just with your hand, and having that messy aspect just beginning. So this is something where, and I can show you guys.
I was trying to find here in my this is my my tablet that's just sitting here. Just, you know, as I'm working, everything's in pencil, everything's scribbling. I'm trying to figure out what my polycultures are. I'm looking at the plant list. Everything starts on a spiral notebook or in a paper, so that I can kind of keep track of what I'm doing, because this is all garbage. I'm not going to put it on the screen, obviously, but I have to decide what I'm going to do on paper. Then I can put it on the computer.
Yeah. Well, this isn't. Oh, there we go.
More about your process here and what you have for your base map. Now I see you have, because we use the scale of permanence a lot. That's how we start. You know, getting our climate data, all that information. There's a key on the side, and we have some other data that we can put in there. But I see you have your access lines.
Yes.
Going in here.
Yeah, I'm making a mess of this right now. So yeah, I've got the access lines. I'll turn off this. Yes. So what's happening here is that you can see it's a little small on this view right now, but this dotted line here, and Dan knows this, is the large equipment access line. So this is how a large vehicle would get into the site, and it's you know, simplified on a suburban site because generally there's one entrance to the site. The rest of this property line along here, this is all fenced, and other neighbors live there, so there's really no reason why you'd be able to access the site any other way. But there's actually quite a bit of dumping of like leaf and lawn debris, sawdust. They have a lot of materials delivered for free by local arborists, stuff like that. So those will be big vehicles coming in, quite large trucks. And so it's important to keep that area clear. And you can see here, they actually the client wants to expand their home into a 4-season porch where that garage used to be. And so Dan and I were talking when he and I met up a couple of weeks ago to review the initial concept of this, about pinch points. And, you know, this is not a huge area that you can still get through here, but So that's 20 feet. This plan's at 1 inch equals 10 feet. And that's plenty of space to get through there. But putting these access lines in is so helpful. And I've seen people comment in the Facebook group about, not wanting to make mistakes in terms of, something being placed on site that needs to be completely changed around once another piece is considered. This is the type of thing that's a classic example of that. Not having a tree or a structure or a swale in the way of where, say, an emergency vehicle or dropping off materials, anything
Right.
would happen, or future construction access. It might not be a huge deal, and it might not prevent future construction, but it might rack the cost up by thousands of dollars if the access isn't good on a site, for example.
And you also kind of get a picture of where your high traffic area is going to be also.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you can just tell right here, this central sort of staging area and intersection, just imagine that's like every morning, a number of times a day. That area is going to get a huge amount of traction or traction.
Yeah.
And so special consideration for that, how are we going to manage something that's going to have heavy machinery, maybe a little tractor over it numbers of times a day, wheelbarrows. That's an area that needs to be, well supported with, it's like we say, anything that involves engineering needs to be done very well. It's like a driveway,
Yes.
a pond, footings for a building, all those kinds of things. Access routes, they get a lot of traffic, need to be done very well. Otherwise, they just turn into big mud holes.
Yep.
Areas like that, obviously, right now, it's going to need a little special consideration to make sure that as they drive off this concrete driveway, I think, is that concrete going to the garage too?
That's what I've proposed. It's currently gravel, but that was just a temporary solution. And this is already concrete.
Right. So those two, that's kind of a design driver, as we would say, that we have to, that's going to go on the list. Is this area, does this need to be reinforced with more gravel, higher drainage, something like that? Because it is where everything is going to crisscross the property. And like you say, that pinch point, that was pretty obvious right off the bat that they were going to add that addition to the left of the house. Well, that means that all that traffic is going to go right through that point.
Yep.
And we talked about this too, because the vegetable garden's up front and left, or front bottom left here in the picture, right? And the garage is there. A lot of activity is in the front of the house. Then you're going to have all of your storage and all of those materials and all those things up there too. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly shipping things back and forth across that area. So and we talked about storage, additional storage in this, but when we talk about like the scale of permanence, as I was talking about, for me, it's climate, getting all that information. And then the second thing when we get into design right away is access. How are we going to get around? Because if you can't get around, what's the point? And then your biggest type 1 errors are based on access and not being able to get things where they need to be, or the fact that, wow, I put this over here, but I got to bring it around this building, or I'm going to really make a mess of it. And then after access is water. Those are the most expensive and the most important things to really to get settled first, and then design around those. Because our ability to move around the property obviously is very important and very time consuming if done wrong.
Absolutely. I just turned on the other utilities here. So this running up and down is the sewer line. And then this orange, I actually didn't see a spot for electricity in the layers, but I put in this orange dotted line. There's an overhead line that comes in here. So that's of course important to consider in terms of trees, especially, or, if it's low enough, vehicles coming through. But another piece about
in gas, is that what purple is, or water?
The purple is the water.
Oh, okay.
Or
that would be under utilities. There's a utility line layer, so I just put all the utilities in that. Like you, I guess. Yeah.
And as far as the access goes, Dan mentioned, going a short distance versus a long distance and where's the water, etc. It's of course incredibly important, especially if there's an installation of some type of crop system that you've got in a certain part of the site, or that you're designing for somebody. It's how easy is it going to be to maintain that, to see it every day, to see what kind of condition it's in, to get the inputs that are required to it. It can make or break the success of a planting if that stuff isn't thought of beforehand. And I don't mean that in a way to, cause anxiety. It's just that this is why the process is so important in terms of laying things out like this, because we can see that, okay, we have considered this, and it's visible, and a visible reminder of that. It's a record of that decision.
Right, right.
So as far as access goes, the rest of this, you can see this brownish purple line, at least that's what it looks like to me, is where I consider the property owners to be moving around most frequently on site. And that's also a reason why I had that for the concept piece. You can see where a lot of that area that's covered by those lines is zone 1, because they do go there so frequently. So you can start to see some overlap with the reasoning behind some of these decisions. That starts out with this this kind of site inventory, if you will. So that's your access there. Looking at the utilities as well, and I'll turn some of those off.
And by the way, that we talked a little bit too, you have a 10-foot easement.
Yes.
Off the street. That's a utility easement?
Yeah, it's for the city. So they're able to kind of do whatever they need to. And in general, what I've found is that it's possible to do more herbaceous plantings that do cross that easement, but in terms of tree planting or any real, of course, no permanent like structures. For example, this driveway, that has to be passed through the planning commission to, get that permitted and things like that when you actually are building anything permanent within that easement.
Mm-hmm. So we also, in our area on these streets, that also there's basically 2 different zones here. So we have the easement, which is dictated by the city. My property, you would not believe, I have a 100-foot easement coming from the road on my property. And I have a big piece of property, but when I did my earthen wall and when I did my pond, they are like right up to that easement line, because
Wow.
it comes, it's like I can't go anywhere near there, because if they want to come through with fiber optics, anything at all, new lines, you name it, they don't have to ask me. They just come through and do it. And that's how it works. The other part that's down here too on that road, because we live in a place where there's snow and right this time of year, they use salt on the roads, and when they plow the roads, all that salt goes on that edge of the property also. So a lot of times we'll put a line down there. It only goes about 5 feet onto the property from the curb, but that's full of salt, and that all the soil there over and over and over, as you can imagine, just gets pounded with salt. And so you have to have plants that first of all can handle the salt and also handle being crushed by snow constantly. So another reason to not put shrubs and trees is because they're being assaulted in many ways.
Yeah, especially since those snowdrifts just become giant ice chunks, and even more compression. Yeah, so what I decided to do down there is to keep things simple. I've found it to be pretty easy to manage these types of, it's kind of a glorified prairie planting. It's just a small patch of prairie grasses and wildflowers in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. We are in a unique area where the eastern broadleaf forest meets the prairies. And we also have some northern forest that comes down and meets us too on the east side. But where that forest meets the prairies, we get oak savanna. And we have a lot of native prairie as our heritage in Minnesota. We're kind of the gateway to the prairie. So it's really imperative, especially as far as pollinator habitat goes, bringing in some more native pollinators, but also insect predators such as predatory and parasitic wasps, flies, spiders, etc. It's all very important to have that that whole ecosystem approach to the landscape, and especially having that stuff by all the fruit trees, by the main vegetable garden. It was just a prime spot on this south exposure, and in an area where we can't put any trees, to put these insectary plantings and just have this beautiful flower heavy planting for people to look at when they're walking by too.
Right. Yeah, that the big benefit there too, not only ecologically, is the fact that you're also putting a very large and beautiful buffer between you and your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And if they see a nice flower garden and it looks pretty, for the most part, they don't really care what you're doing behind that.
Yes.
We call it an entry garden in landscape design. Like you coming up the driveway here, or if there was a sidewalk, you would call that an entry garden. And basically it represents what's going on in the rest of the property. So that's a really great space. And there, of course, you can do a lot of things in there. You know, it could have vegetables also.
Yes.
So it's a very, very nice space. Lots of perennials, great things to have growing in there, flowering shrubs outside the easement, but a wonderful place to just designate it for perennial flowering plants. Socially, it works to your benefit, and then ecologically also, like you're saying, next to all those fruit trees, now you have habitat and you have a food source for all those parasitic insects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another consideration here was that there's quite heavy deer pressure. So in general, with the plants that I selected that are outside of a fence, so I did say that the sides are fenced, although this is just an open split rail fence. It's not going to keep any herbivores out. And then the front here is completely open. There are deer coming up from the river corridor forest and meandering through the site and things. So it's an interesting challenge, and of course a very common one wherever we are in the world in terms of herbivores, and to varying degrees. But these days, especially in the city, we've got pretty high deer and rabbit populations.
Yeah.
So
by the way, we had it's an old count, but in Minnesota we had 25 deer per square mile. In New York State, they have 45.
Yeah.
On the island of Molokai, they had 1,000 deer per square mile.
Whoa.
On that island, the last count they did. Can you? I can't. And I've been out there doing some work, and it's insane. It's totally insane. But those big herbivores are a huge problem for an initially planted orchard.
Mm-hmm.
The damage they do that first season when that tree is just trying to get started stunts that tree for the rest of its life.
Yes.
So we have to be very careful in the beginning of protecting all these young trees, especially in the wintertime when they're eating the buds.
Mm-hmm.
When the leaves are coming out and they're just chowing down on these, a little bit of netting, a little bit of fencing goes a long way for about the first 3 to 5 years. And after that, the deer aren't really doing that much problem with the I call it just natural pruning.
Yes. Yeah, and there's a couple other factors there too. It's also when deer are browsing things, they also expose the plant's vascular system to potential disease. And I've noticed that deer in general will tend to test things out when they're first put in a landscape too. So it's definitely important when you're working with people who especially aren't familiar with having all these plants out on the landscape that they maybe invested a lot of money and or time in putting into place, is that sometimes deer will just eat a bunch of buds right like the first week after it's planted, and then they'll leave it alone for the rest of the year. But it's something you can't really put a finger on. They'll change from site to site. So Dan, one thing I have been curious about is that in the past, when I've done work on farms especially, I used welded wire panels that were about 5 feet tall, and we put them into a circle, and then we put them over the top of the tree to protect them from the deer. Right. And that it's effective in keeping the deer away, but it makes it kind of a bear to manage. I guess there's mulching that can happen around the tree, but you still have to get in there and weed and stuff. Do you have a preferred method of protecting?
Right. So I did those you get the big welded wire fencing, make the big circle and put it over the tree. And especially any of the trees that I had that were out in the landscape, and it basically holds itself up. But it was to protect the tree from the deer, mostly in the wintertime. from rubbing their antlers,
Yeah.
eating the buds, things like that. But anything that we had, and that's out on the landscape, but the trees that were out there, most of the things that we put, at least on my property and other properties, I really encourage people. It's like, bite the bullet and put up some fencing.
Yeah.
Once it's big enough, you can take the stuff down, but really you need to protect those trees. Now, if you use that plastic deer netting, you can do that. But it's like everything we do to keep the deer out makes it much more difficult for us too,
Yeah.
to do maintenance. So it's like either way, you kind of lose on that. But I have basically, like you were saying about them browsing. Now, if you have 40 deer coming through your land and they're all browsing, that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? If you have half a dozen coming through once in a while and they're just picking things here and there, it's not so bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I think really what we need to do is just give them a lot more things to eat, right? And so that they leave the trees alone.
Right.
And one of my favorite things is hostas. Hostas are like the best thing to throw out there because they'll eat those things to the ground and then they'll move on.
Yep.
And hostas are like a dime a dozen.
And they grow quickly.
Yeah, they'll grow quickly. They're like comfrey. They'll come back. Now, on the other hand, comfrey, they won't eat, right? So they're like going around and they'll eat the little tiny leaves in the center, and then the rest of the big ones they won't touch because they know that they're not, they're probably toxic at that point for the deer.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is fencing there or something, we did do a lot of these round welded wire circles, put it right over the tree, would lift it up, do mulching, whatever we needed to do, but that was to protect it for basically a short amount of time. That said, I would have to say here, it wasn't the browsing that ruined the trees, it was the rubbing of the antlers by the deer that caused the greatest amount of damage, because they can nibble on the leaves, but when they started ripping the bark off on the side, that was really tough. So we were wrapping and using, I don't know if there might be some pictures on my Facebook page or my site, but drain tile.
Yeah.
We use drain tile. We slice one side of it, and you basically wrap as high as you can go with a 6-inch piece of black drain tile, and that protects that entire trunk. And we have that around our trees. Some of that's been around our trees for 8 years. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go away. Yeah. And it basically just protects the trunk, and it's big enough, right, that you have air. There's not going to be any fungus. There's not going to be a disease in there. Mm-hmm. Enough airflow with that. But it really protects the trunk of the tree from goats and from the deer and whatever else might be chowing down, and the voles too, I would guess.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Yeah, right.
One thing I'm thinking about, thanks for sharing that, that's really helpful, is so we can see here, this is something that I'm wanting to update with the actual scientific names of things. I saw that you had done that on another design, but as far as showing the understory planting. So what's going on here in this whole design right now, and as I mentioned, I'm still working on it in terms of finishing it up. I've got my final design meeting this coming Monday with the client, and I feel like I'm in a good spot. It won't be hard to finish. But you can see how, so I've got various trees. This Divii is Diosporos virginiana, American persimmon. We've got black elderberry, pawpaw, and actually the Chicago hardy fig in this area. That's this sun catchment. But you can see as far as the structure in terms of what I've placed here, there's these are all larger shrubs, witch hazel, pagoda dogwood, and then small understory trees such as ironwood that I know in general these native shrubs will do well under black walnuts, for example. But as far as showing the understory plantings, especially to the point of, the actual placement and numbers, one thing that I've done in the past is working more in these kind of blobs. So like this shady shortgrass insectary, partially because this is something I'm interested in having your input on, Dan, is that I've worked in a way where I'd take this blob in the past and I'd say, okay, I want 30% of this to be sedge. I want 20% to be this certain wildflower and the other 50 to be ferns and Solomon seal or something. And then I'll calculate the square footage by that 25%, see my overall square footage, and then how many square feet an individual plant of that species takes up. And then I get a quantity of plants.
Right.
It's kind of a, yeah, it would be easier to see written out. But rather than doing that, there, of course, is another method of just placing all the individual plant symbols. So I'm curious how you approach that, Dan, in terms of, say, like this area. So this is going to be a sowing garden. This is also going to be perennial vegetables and some supporting plants among these larger shrubs and trees. How do you approach that in terms of wanting to make sure that the plan stays legible and isn't overwhelming to look at?
Right. So as a lot of people know, and looking at some of my work, is I used a lot of muted colors, like you're kind of doing here. And even this is a little, gets to be a little dark, but
it is dark, yeah.
Right. So as you move into this, like even on these designs, I use a lot of transparency, and I like the trees especially to fade back. They don't need to be solid. They don't need to have this big thing. And so then I can see what's underneath. So every one of these trees, the oak trees here, and all the other ones, are basically kind of a faded black line, and then the inside is some kind of green and faded. Or we call it screen back, or the transparency is higher transparency, low opacity, so that you can see what's underneath and keep it simple. It very quickly can get highly complex if you're starting to add, 20 daffodils and ground nuts and all these other kind of things in there. That can actually start to make it quite complex. But for the most part, what I like to do, and I could even share a screen with you if you wanted to.
Yeah.
On this.
Just let me know when you're ready.
Yeah. I'm going to open up a file here.
Cool. Yeah, and I think in terms of mine, probably knocking down, I should say upping the transparency to twice what it is, knocking down the opacity so it's not as opaque to about 50% for these planting beds. And what I actually did for these paths is I just put a giant rectangle over the whole plan, and then I did my planting beds over it so that I got that color difference. Didn't have to draw all the paths.
Mm-hmm. A second here. I'm going to just change something on this one.
Sure. So I can show everybody, this is the, I've got another artboard. It's these different white squares in Illustrator. And this is where I've been resizing symbols. So this is an actual symbol. So this text is attached to the shape. I'll double click. It'll ask me if I want to change a symbol definition. And I'm able to do that and change that specifically within just my drawing versus changing it for all the people in United Designers. And then when I'm done, I've got a list going of the different plants that I've created that I didn't see in the symbol library yet for United Designers. And so I'll go back in and add those in the correct size and with the right description.
Right. I want to get the, I'm gonna open up a PDF for you so you can see.
Cool. Another thing I'm really excited about here in the front of the house is a blueberry and lingonberry patch in this really sunny catchment here where the sun's bouncing off of the house later in the day. This side is where the sun's coming from the west. And both of these plants love acidic soils. I'll probably put another supporting plant in there. But it's exciting to create these kind of new ecosystems in a way. We're extrapolating just a few of the plants of this traditional bog community for this area that we know we can easily make this small area acidic without too much work and too much input.
So on this one, the herb kitchen's there.
Oh yeah, I can share again.
Just talking about the one that you had open there. So just as an example, if we can see your symbol list.
Yeah.
Off on the right there, click on your, or I mean,
oh,
you're using
yes.
the one in your symbol library, yeah, with the clover. There you go. And if you pull that down to make it a list up in the upper right there where those bars are, you can say to, large list view. There we go.
Oh, that helps.
Yeah. So now this is what I'm saying. And this is our main library of symbols. This is where they're all ordered by scientific name to make it easier to find them. Because if you put them by common name, it's crazy. You're never going to be able to find anything because everybody has different names for these things.
Yeah.
Especially when you start working internationally.
Yep.
Now, let's just say I had one of these Sambucus nigra, say that elderberry, and I have it all over my property, right? I want to put it somewhere, but I also want to make it a polyculture, and I don't want to have to keep recreating that polyculture. I would go up to that menu in the upper right of the list and duplicate, on those lines, and just say duplicate the symbol. And now if I double click on the symbol in the menu, on the symbol itself, I can drag and drop any plants I want to around this plant.
Oh, yes.
Right. So I can take, any one of those, and I wouldn't put a Korean nut pine around this, but say I wanted to put some hazelnuts around this elderberry. The elderberry is going to be, nice and high, just like that, right? Maybe it's a Baptisia australis, some other things. What I'm doing now is building a polyculture, but when I save it back, this is now going to be a symbol. And I only have to drag and drop this once onto my design and then just duplicate it. And if I want to change that, all I have to do is go back into my symbol library, double click on that one again.
There it is.
And I can change it. So as I bring that in, everywhere I drag and drop that, those same plants are going to be there.
That's awesome.
Right? And if I go, you know what, I think I want to add something else, all I have to do is double click on the symbol. I can add a couple of nitrogen fixers, maybe some daffodils, whatever I want to do, save it back. And everywhere I've used that, it will automatically fill those in.
That's fantastic.
This is a lot of what I'm constantly doing now is and they're all to scale, right? So I can just keep grabbing these things, finessing them around, right? Getting my polyculture made. And then when I click and close it, and there's that arrow on the upper left, or however you do return, it will automatically, update it. There you go. But it not only will automatically update the symbol in the library, anywhere you use it on the landscape, it will also change those too. Now,
it's just so powerful.
At one point, I like how this is, but it's not fitting. I can actually break the symbol link. So if I highlight that and I go up to those lines again in the menu,
Yeah, I just right-clicked.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, break the symbol link. Now they're all out there as individual plants, and I can rearrange them.
Yep.
But I know I have used this symbol, say, 3 or 4 times, and it's much easier to count. So I'm using this elderberry polyculture, 8 times. I already know what plants are in it. It makes it much easier to count the plants that way. So these little polycultures, and we have these for apples. We've got these for tropical plants. We have a whole tropical polyculture plant symbol library with all those things in it. So, you've got the apple one there. So that's a symbol. And basically, and in this case, I have to remind me what's in this, is that I will drag this on once and, use it, but then I'll go back in the symbol library and just delete that text, right? So it's not showing up on my design. I'll just cut it and paste it somewhere else.
Okay.
As far as my plant list. So, and if you click on that, it should show up in your, if it is in your library. I don't know if that's a actual symbol. Oh, there it is. Is it there?
That's the Sambucus. It is.
I see. It's already been.
I did import it as a symbol.
Right.
There's the no starts here.
You could drag that whole thing into your symbol library, and now it would be a symbol. Yeah. Apple polyculture, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So anytime you make something, now it's a symbol. And even if you take it off your design, you will always have that.
Yes. Yep.
And I mean, now you can drag and drop that symbol wherever you want.
So here, yeah, I'm able to, all these plants together.
Yep.
This makes design a lot of fun.
Oh, and you know what's nice about it too, because in the end we have to start counting all these plants anyway, and it's easier to count them in the polyculture. But you know, we've already got that. It looks like a comfrey or something out in the path. You're going to have to sooner or later start moving these things around to fit.
Yeah, exactly.
But at least you have a known number of plants,
right,
that you're putting in. And then because you can break that symbol link, move everything around. That doesn't change your plant count. It only makes it make more sense as to where things are going to be, especially when, you know, sunlight and all those things need to be considered. You're going to want to change that. By the way, this apple it's surrounded by those 64 are daffodils, which are the rodent deterrent to keep the mice away from eating the tree. And then 23 is comfrey. And then I think the little guys in there are alpine strawberries.
They are, yeah.
Yep. And then 61 is the baptisia. That's the big nitrogen fixer. And what's nice about the baptisia, Baptisia australis, blue wild indigo, is that comfrey has got nothing on that. The baptisia will like shoot right through the comfrey.
Wow.
No competition whatsoever. Whereas comfrey pretty much covers everything else.
Yeah, baptisia is one of those plants that comes up in that kind of spear.
Yeah, it's like asparagus. Kind of shoots out of the ground and then gets huge, and it's a big nitrogen fixer for the trees. Cut flower.
Speaking of asparagus-like shoots, I am putting giant Solomon seal in this design for the spring shoots. I got really inspired by Paradise Lot, Eric Tonesmeyer and Jonathan Bates' book. They had the Massachusetts garden in Holyoke where they had over 200 species of cold climate perennial plants. Food or also aesthetic value. So one thing, it's 2:00 now. We're actually probably going to wrap up pretty soon. We could, of course, you know, probably do another one of these at some point. That would be pretty fun. If you're into it, Dan.
Sure. Let me show you one more. Show you one more little trick thing.
Perfect.
As the one thing that Illustrator does not do very well is count things.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you area. It doesn't tell you a lot of things that we want to know, and so we basically have to figure it out or wait till you get into it. Make it an Acrobat file. An Acrobat will do that. It'll give you area and all those kinds of things. So if I click on one of my symbols here, there, and then up in that menu on those lines, I can click and say all instances, select all instances. It's down about 3 more lines. All instances, there you go. Everywhere it's used to be highlighted. Now, if I go up to window and drop down to documents, document information, there we go. And then that has also a menu. I don't know why if you go to the little menu thing and click on objects,
3.
It will give you a count of how many times that symbol has been used.
Awesome.
And so that is very, very helpful by the time you get done with this design, you can just go down it and say, find all instances, and that little window will tell you how many of each plant you've put in. And then I will double click, and I actually, not probably here, but I'll put that number actually in my symbol list to the right. I got to put it somewhere. So I'll double click and put it like to the right of the common name or something. But that's called document information. And then make sure that objects are clicked on, and then it will tell you. And that just sits open. You just leave that open all the time. It will tell you the length of your lines. It has all sorts of great information. If I do a fence line, like around this property, it will tell me how many inches long that line is, no matter how squirrely it is, right?
Yep.
And then I can tell how many feet, and now I know how much fence I need to buy.
Beautiful.
So that little document info box is very helpful when we're getting done and we need to kind of quantifying things. Because that's the one, and that's very, very helpful, because for the most part, Illustrator isn't helpful in quantifying or counting things for us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've also I haven't used it yet, but I will for one of the final pages of this plan is dimensions. You can actually create dimension line work and call outs in Illustrator quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a question from Ron. He was asking how people might get access to these templates and become part of United Designers.
Well, sure. If you want to, maybe I'll share a screen.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll
Okay.
stop sharing.
So let's talk about it. Can you see this?
Looks like my screen was sharing. Oh, I see yours now.
Okay. So let's say Crandall Botanical Preserve. I just wanted to mention, so this is 40 acres a site, but just to show you a couple little things on here.
Great.
When we're talking about our polycultures, I actually, when I have my title block, I'll make a white box. I drag on one of my polycultures to explain what it is. And these are called call outs. So I do a lot of that to explain to the client what plants are being used. And these are the actual then symbols that I drag onto the landscape, as you can see over to the left. And I just keep repeating those. So that helps me because these are complex. This is a foraging property. And so that helps me with my plant count, but that also to make sure I know what's going in and gives them a bigger view also. So there's a woodland polyculture. There's a woodland polyculture B. Again, these are more shrubs, less perennials, dragging those in because these are really very tiny. You can see my scale here is 1 to 80 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I kind of have to blow things up a little bit. On the other hand, let's see, I got to move this out of the way. On the other hand, because it's an Illustrator and because it's a vector file, I have these so that they can zoom in at any time, you know, or I can, and we can actually see in great detail what the plants are, what the polycultures are, you know, and this again is that grouping.
Mm-hmm.
So it's helpful in the design, and then also remember, see all these little numbers that are in here. That's on a separate layer in Illustrator. Those are all the little habitat areas. I just went and numbered all the little habitat areas to kind of keep track. But they also help identify which plot I'm talking about when we're working out on the landscape. I'm going to switch here to the desktop and talk a little about, I'll be really short about it.
Okay.
The United Designers, if I can find out where I'm supposed to be here. Here we go. So how United Designers work, it's very straightforward. We're a group of people working together, and I really encourage people as much as possible to work in teams. I just worked on a project with a lady from the Netherlands. I have people from Spain, New York, Canada, Alaska, all over. We work together on this. Bryce Roddock is in Milwaukee. Fabrice Doucette is in Haiti. So I like working in teams. We all have access to this Dropbox folder as far as being United Designers. What's in this folder are a lot of folders, of course, is our resource documents and our libraries. So when I talked about this folder, this is our empty folder. Duplicate this. This is every project folder has this same thing. It has a place to put our climate data, plants, soils, all of that. I duplicate this and then I drag this onto my project folder, wherever that is. And now I have my format, just like our layers in Illustrator, ready to go for all of my information. And I have the templates for Illustrator to get started. So 24 by 36, a bunch of different ones in here. Site assessment table, which is how we gather all of our information about the site. The design outline, which I had open here earlier, but here's our process. So that's all this documentation is to help us keep organized. A priority grid, which is for the client, and then there's some other documentation for them. So this is how we get organized with that. Site assessment documents are here. Details in measuring, process notes again. There's a project I'm working on in InDesign, which is another Adobe software. with our site assessment to get that organized. Not quite finished there. But again, more information as far as site assessment documents to help us to do that work, checklists, things like that. And then a site assessment guide, which is actually a 35-page site assessment guide that we actually give to the client, and that's for them to fill out. We could go over this another time. We should have another one of these.
We totally should. This is super fun.
Yeah. And then my report template is how I report this information to the client, okay? So there's 2 folders, B and A. And then what more there is, these are all my spreadsheet calculators, because we need to calculate animal units, if you're familiar with that, how to scale our drawings up. There's a little calculator to make that easy. And I'm looking for downloading something here. Map sizing. We have a catchment calculator, but I don't seem to see it on here. I'll have to figure out where that went. But there's also a calculator. Once you know all the square footage of your buildings, you put this in, you get your information about climate, about rain in a chart, and it tells you every month how many gallons are coming off the roof lines of each one of your buildings, right? To help us size swales, to help us size tanks, all those kinds of things. And also to blow the doors off of our clients, because they're getting, did you know you're getting 50,000 gallons of water off your roof? A lot of people don't know they're getting a lot.
Make use of it, yeah.
Yeah, how do we make use of that? So, okay, now, here's where we have, this is the goods right here. The symbol libraries. Here's our key art. So all of my things that I use in the key, experimental plant brushes. There are plant symbols that you can turn into brushes so that they can make a nice line as you make your line across. Polyculture symbols, bamboo symbol library, humid tropics library, all symbols library. Right now what we have is the all symbols library right here. Ben Missimer, he's another one of our designers in Mississippi. He went through the library, 300 and some plants, and just cleaned it up. Got rid of a lot of artifacts, got some things, and so we put his initials on that to make sure. So this is where all those are. It's a 12 megabyte file, and there's 300 some symbols in there, and it's all the symbols that we have. We put them here. A lot of these other ones are basically remnants, but they have a purpose. And so this is what people have. Now, to put it short, and we'll talk about this another time, you can go to uniteddesigners.org. There's documents on there too. But to be part of United Designers is a very simple process. Either we hire you or you hire us. That's how it works. Once you're hired for a job for any kind of business part, any kind of, I should say, task oriented, you're part of us. You're part of the group. And it's not like we're the mob, you know, it's not like a pyramid scheme or anything like that, right? Or if you have a project and you need help with, you know, we've got 8 or 9 people to choose from. Ask somebody for some help and go through the process of doing your design. Everybody's got to get fed, so there's got to be some money involved. So you hire one of us, you're in the team. The more people that are working this process, the more people that are using the tools, the more tools we get. The more projects that are being done with our symbols, the more symbols we make. Mm-hmm. So it's a team effort to do this project work, I think, and everybody's job looks better. Everybody gets their logos on the design. If I help somebody with their design and my logo goes on it, I have a nice portfolio piece now too. And I know something about that neighborhood or that region or that state or wherever it might be. So it's about getting more experience faster, doing more work faster with more people. And so we all learn at the same time. There are some classrooms and training, like Pete mentioned about Chicago and Spain. I was in the Netherlands for 2 weeks doing something there. We had a class at my place in Minnesota last fall. That's a great way to doing it, and it's wonderful. And I really like the team effort we do there for 5 days, learning the system and practicing. But it's really doing the work is the way to learn. Mm-hmm. Got to get a project. Got to get something going. And don't let any complexity or size phase you at all. Our design process from 5 acres to 50,000 acres, it works because it's scalable and it's ecological. And anybody on the team can help you make that work. And your stuff is going to look great. And it's just like I like to say, when there used to be carburetors on cars. If you ever tried to do a carburetor kit and you got your car actually running after that first time, you're lucky. But usually you had your buddies from high school helping you fix this car and get it running. 2 or 3 carburetors later, all the carburetors are pretty much the same, right? So it's always mileage. Working together on these, doing them faster, doing them integrated with more people. So then we're all better. We all get faster, we get better, and we have a standard that everybody's now working with. And we understand why this looks better than that, why we want to work this way and have a presentation. And when somebody sees United, it's funny because I hear this all the time. Did you do that work? Or Warushka from Netherlands put one of her designs on I think it's one of the Facebook pages. And who was that? Oh, Matt Powers was saying, did you get that from Dan Halsey? Because
Yeah,
it's a style, right?
right.
It's a good style. It has nothing to do with preferences of my style or anything. I'm a designer, been a designer for a long time. It's a design that works and it's a style that works. That's why we do it that way. It's not because I like purple or because I like a certain sort of screening. It's like, no, this is what works. So that's why we do it that way, to communicate the design to the client really well, and also to make changes, right, which are always going to happen, so we can make changes and adapt and then build more skill and assets so we can do more design work faster and better as teams. Turn this stuff around, right? We got to kill it and bill it. That's what we say. Get the thing done, make it good so that you can move on to the next project, right? And people can get their work that much faster.
Yeah, and that's what this is really all about too. Sorry to cut you off. Did you have something else you were going to say?
Oh, no.
It's getting more design done so we can get more of these systems in the ground, get them online, get these more perennialized ecological systems up around the world. And as Dan is always saying, like, this is really a system not only to make our work easier to get more stuff from the ground, but to help us all build each other up so we can, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? The tide is rising with these tools and, with this collaboration we're able to do across the country, in the US, across the world, and have experts who have done projects in specific regions and have that know-how, have those connections as well. We're really able to create a lot of momentum. And I think that might be the theme of my year is focused momentum, because it's just so powerful, and we're all here for the same reasons, right? So
right. And really what's nice about it, once you build these relationships, and I've mentioned Ben a couple times, Ben is great. He does all of my drone files. He puts them all together. He gets the elevations. He does the topography for me. It works great. He knows Illustrator's designer. He came up for a class in Minnesota last fall. Wonderful. What's best about it, though, is I can do a KMZ file on Google Earth. I can save it. I can email it to him. I can grunt, and he'll go, got it. Because we know, right? I say, Ben, I got this much money. Can you do this and this? And he goes, sure. 2 emails later, he's working. I'm working on my stuff. By the end of the week, we are so far ahead of this. And by the way, it's done better because he is focused on CAD and he knows GIS and he knows how to do this topography. He's done it so many times, right? I've done it too, but to have 2 of us now working on these projects and getting it better cranks up the quality and the speed of it that much more. And he runs into problems and then he tells me, oh, this is what's happening. We're going to have to do this. We have to do that. Now we both know, right? Mm-hmm. And then we'll talk about that, and then we tell everybody else what's going on with that too. So that's what I can do this with. Warushka, who is in the Netherlands, worked with her last week, and I just needed so much help on symbols and plant files. She was doing research. She understood this lagoon in Poland that we were working on, and it's like so helpful. It's like, did she do the design work? Did she put it up there? It's like she was doing the background design work, helping me make the symbols, helping me make the elevation art, all those kinds of things, and I'm placing them. But without, like Pete's saying, without that momentum of a couple people moving this forward, it just, I couldn't have done it. It would have taken so long because I would have had to stop doing this, go do that. How does that look? Whereas I'm working on the design placement, and she's just filling those folders full of symbols correctly, right? From our plant list that she is also building in Excel. So, by the way, there's another webinar, another thing to talk about. So we have the natural capital plant database that everybody is in that we use. All of our symbols come from that because that gives us our information. Pete, you're on there, I know. I think everybody's on there that we're working with. So all of these tools are basically to help us work as a teams, build our assets so that we can work faster and better and actually smarter, of course, too. Because we run into issues. I don't want to say that everything is just like butter. You know, we run into issues and all of a sudden we need to talk. This isn't right. This isn't working. What's the, you know, I'm reading this research, you're reading that research. Is this plant doing what everybody says? Or do we need to think about this a little more carefully? That's a great thing about working at a team. No assumptions. Well,
Awesome.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, so if you guys got something out of this conversation today, there's more to be found in the professional permaculture designer group that you all joined on Facebook. So I focus there on building design and business skills. People like Dan are also in there. And this is part of this building momentum. So we can all be in one place together. And of course, there are other permaculture groups, which I invite you to take part in on Facebook. I do also offer design business mentorship for anyone looking to create reliable sales strategy, grow their business, and get more permaculture systems designed in the ground. And that's also part of bringing the United Designers together, as we can hire each other. Someone else might find a job at different times within your same region, and we can kind of feed each other work in that way. So there are links up above in the chat box. I'll see if I can post them again. There we go. So if you guys do want to get on a call with me about learning about that mentorship, but also just talking about design and where you're at, I'd love to learn more about you guys on a personal level. So you can feel free to schedule a call there. The uniteddesigners.org site, the link is there too as well. And so Dan's got a course, and I believe there are spaces left for late February in Chicago, February 25th to March 1st. And I'll be a part of that. I'll be a student in it. And then what are the dates for the one in May in Spain, Dan?
Spain's the 20th to the 25th of May.
Okay.
And it's actually, I have to tell you, it's the week after, and I can't even pronounce it. There's a festival week in Spain the week before that. So those guys have been saying, if you're going to come for the class, come a week early because you're going to have a fantastic time. It's like a major national holiday for that whole week.
Wow.
In Spain. So in Madrid.
Are you going for the festival?
It depends.
Okay.
Still a ways up. I really would like to, but if I go early, I usually start traveling around to sites, to see. I want to go back to the ecosystem restoration camp, see what's going on there, and that's about a 4-hour drive from Madrid. So
is that in Spain or Portugal?
That's in southern Spain.
Okay.
Yeah. So the ecosystem restoration camp is Murcia is way on the east coast. It's like a few hours west of Murcia in the south. Huh. Yeah. So there's a lot. There's some. Everywhere you go, it's amazing because when I travel too, it's like people ask me, "Did you see this? Did you see that?" It's like, no. It's like I've never been to any tourist thing anywhere because I go to the farms. Mm-hmm. There are people in Spain that are farming out of caves for hundreds of years. It's amazing. It's like, I want to go see that.
Yes.
Their barn is carved out of the side of a mountain.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, I would like to see artwork and go to a museum, but I really want to go see this farmer's family who've been, have this huge cavern that they've been farming out of for, generations. So anyway.
Yeah, there are many ways to be immersed in the culture of a place, and that sounds like a great one.
Yeah. It's like, let's head out to see the farmers, and you're going to get the culture there too. So I'll try to answer some of these questions. I think there's some in this group chat. I didn't have it open myself.
I answered a lot of them. Okay. The main piece that was coming up was how can people be part of United Designers, and we covered that.
There's a couple. Yeah. So by the way, if you email me, there's things that we can set up. Also through the plant database, one of the memberships in the plant database also gives you the symbol files if you're working in Illustrator.
Nice.
It doesn't give you the documents. It doesn't give you anything like the United Designers stuff, but it does give you the symbol files that go along with the plant database lists, and that's helpful. There's a lot of ways to work, but the easiest way is find a project and let's work on it.
Yep.
Make it happen.
Yeah, so Dan and I are both on Facebook if you want to reach out. as well. And I think Dan's contact info is probably on United Designers website. Is that true?
Yeah, uniteddesigners.org, southwoodscenter.com.
Yeah.
Or just Google me.
Thanks so much for your time today, Dan. This was great.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for putting this together.
You bet. Thanks everybody for joining, and the recording will be available later on. I'll post it.
Yeah, I didn't even get to do some shout outs. Is Dustin's on here?
Yeah, Dustin, he said you could visit his family in Madrid if you want.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. Denise, Warren. Oh, yeah. Look at all these people. I wasn't looking at this list up here. Yeah, let's keep in touch, everybody, and thank you for your time.
Sounds good. Have a great week, everybody. See you around.
Bye, Pete. Thanks.
Bye.